Hello! Today we will talk to Gleb Vladimirovich Nesovsky about the emergence of the very first major state in human history. In the Multimedia Museum of the New Chronology, there is a hall dedicated to this topic, called The Rise of the First Empire. It provides detailed information about all stages of the formation and development of this state, from invention of agriculture to the building of the empire. The exhibition hall features a multimedia map displaying the areas where the most common crops originated, as well as maps of the territories of the First Empire. Visitors can also learn about the ancient method of bread making. And now I would like to ask Gleb Vladimirovich to talk about the reasons for the emergence of the First Empire in the northern part of the African continent. Good evening, Gleb Vladimirovich.
Good evening.
Gleb Vladimirovich, please tell us why the first major state of the ancient world was formed precisely in the northern part of Africa, in the Nile Valley. And how did it manage to become an empire?
Well, let's take a look. This is the Nile Valley. That's where our agricultural civilization originated. That's where people ended up and multiplied. They were forced to engage in agriculture because agriculture could not have emerged anywhere else. This is thoroughly explained in our books. And this is not just our point of view, but also the perspective of other researchers. Agriculture emerged due to exceptional reasons. The Nile Valley is an extraordinary place on Earth, which represents a narrow, fertile strip of land surrounded by deserts from all sides, where agriculture could be practiced. Not only in terms of planting and harvesting, but also in terms of developing different crop varieties. The entire area can be plowed, but extensive plowing is not even required. After the Nile floods, you just need to lightly dig the soil or directly plant in the soil. Extensive plowing is not necessary there. What is agriculture primarily engaged in? It primarily deals with weed control. In other words, we have to plow, we have to weed. We constantly fight against weeds that encroach upon our fields. Because our fields are surrounded by meadows, forests, and we cannot cultivate every last patch of land, we have a lot of uncultivated wild land. And that's where everything comes from and invades our fields, and we constantly deal with it. But in the Nile Valley, this was not necessary. When it was fully settled, all the land was cultivated. Weeds were uprooted once and for all, and they were all eliminated. The birthplace of hard wheat varieties is Ethiopia, not far from there. They started planting wheat and selected larger grains, engaging in wheat breeding. And the wild wheat couldn't interfere with them because there was a desert around. They planted it and developed the desired varieties. So, agriculture is based on the practice of planting what is brought from afar. In our fields, we plant wheat, but we don't have wild wheat. Therefore, everything is fine with us. But in places where there is wild wheat, before the advent of herbicides, wheat couldn't be grown. It would immediately crossbreed and become wild. That's why all the varieties in our agriculture are imported from afar. Nikolai Vavilov also pointed this out. Agriculture is based on growing something other than what could be brought from the neighboring forest. No, it's not like that. It's about what is brought from thousands of kilometers away and what is not available in the neighboring forest. Only then can agriculture be successfully practiced. And how do you imagine an ancient person, let's say from Russia, traveling thousands of kilometers for some cucumbers from China and then returning, bringing them and planting them? Not just cucumbers, but wheat, oats, all of that had to be brought from thousands of kilometers away. Can you imagine what a long journey it would be in those times when there was no statehood and each tribe lived in its own place? They would have been immediately robbed and killed. It was difficult to leave one's village. They couldn't stray from their small patch of land, which was governed by some community. Strangers would be immediately robbed and killed. And why not? There were no laws on this matter. That's why long-distance travel was excluded. It only became possible when a huge state emerged. We don't realize that these journeys for seeds and communication between distant parts of the land are only possible if there are protected communication routes. Without them, it was impossible. That's why this center of civilization emerged precisely in the Nile Valley, because everything was limited by the desert and all the land was cultivated. And that's where it all began. They didn't have to travel thousands of kilometers to get something that didn't grow around them. They could cultivate local plants, simply cultivate all these plants, and there were no wild ones left. That's why the initial agriculture emerged here. Then this center, which has access to the Mediterranean Sea, started spreading along the coasts. Because they didn't have any horses, they traveled on boats. And they sailed away from there on these boats. In this breeding ground, the world's first empire emerged. Armed forces were formed, and royal power emerged. Unlike all the other tribes, which sat in their own corners, a powerful center emerged here that had a strong agricultural base, its own armed forces, and began to spread, conquering or slaughtering, or assimilating all the other tribes. Initially, they simply slaughtered them. And they spread along the coasts of the Mediterranean Sea. Where did this ancient Mediterranean culture come from? Its roots go back to the time when this emerging empire had its capital in Egypt. They settled along the coast, wherever they could reach. And where could they reach along the coasts? They settled along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. They settled along the coast of the Black Sea. They entered major rivers that flow into the Black and Mediterranean Seas. They entered major rivers in the Black Sea region, the Don, the Danube, and the Volga. Because, you see, between the Don and the Volga is not far at all. There is a canal there now, but before, there was a portage. There is a small river there. Much less distance needs to be covered. There are rivers that flow into the Don and Volga. They are very close to each other. This is the ancient portage from the Don to the Volga. In other words, they reached the coast of the Caspian Sea, traveled up the Dnieper, the Danube, the Volga. It was from the Egyptian center that they settled all of this, sailing on boats. Look at what happened next. It turned out that they found themselves on the edge of the world they had colonized. They couldn't move south. There, the desert immediately begins, followed by tropical jungles. They didn't even know where the Nile originated. They tried to move south but couldn't. They couldn't advance here. They sailed along the Red Sea, sailed to India. That was also colonized. But in addition to all that, they settled all of this northern part. This was their colonized world. And they found themselves on the very edge of this world. because reaching India was still far. And here, in the Arabian Peninsula, there is a desert. They had connections with India and Siam, what is now called Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, that was ancient Siam. But those were remote parts. In immediate proximity to them was this region, the coasts of rivers and seas. And finding themselves on the periphery, they naturally and wisely moved their capital here, to the center of the world they had colonized, to the Bosporus, between the Black and Mediterranean seas. Moreover, Egypt doesn't have iron ore, and by that time, they had already discovered iron. But there is plenty of it in the Balkans. Egypt has many resources. Iron ore exists everywhere, just not in Egypt. There is gold and copper in Egypt, but there is no iron there, and there is no fuel to smelt it. Therefore, when iron appeared, they naturally moved here. This was the optimal point. But they already had knowledge of agriculture, their own seeds, and the ability to cultivate the land, and so on. And as we believe, Christ invented the scythe, judging by his reflection as Emperor Andronikos Komnenos. In other words, the invention of the scythe enabled animal husbandry in northern lands. Without a scythe, you cannot feed the livestock in winter. You need to stockpile a huge amount of hay. In Egypt, they used sickles. It's impossible without a scythe. When the scythe was invented, the meadows were mowed, and the population in the north started to grow rapidly. The scythe made it possible. It's no wonder that Emperor Andronikos Komnenos, who is a reflection of Christ, as Byzantine historians write, ordered to depict himself as a farmer with a scythe in his hands. Here, Christ was an emperor. Here he was crucified, and then a completely different history began. The capital moved north. At first, everything fell apart, then it moved north. But that's a long conversation, not for this film. Visit the Museum of the New Chronology in Yaroslavel. It's a wonderful museum, where everything is explained in great detail and visually presented. The entire history, according to the New Chronology, how it developed with all the details, with a modern presentation of the material on interactive screens. The museum is very well made, and I recommend it to everyone. For those who have never read our books, I suggest visiting simply to acquaint themselves with our reconstruction, not the methods, that's a separate topic. We have a complete set of books that presents the methods of the New Chronology as well as all the proofs. And if someone wants to familiarize themselves with the final result first and then, if they find it interesting, delve into the proofs and justifications, I recommend that person read our multi-volume work, consisting of small volumes, called Russia and Rome. Not the previous Russia and Rome, that was published long ago, but the recent popular books under the same title, Russia and Rome. 3 books have been released. The first book, How It All Began, the second book, Christ, and the third book, After Christ. In the spring, the 4th book will be released, titled, The Great Conquest of the World. It's a story about how history is viewed according to the New Chronology. And if you want to delve deeper, if you want to know the details, we have many books that explain the New Chronology in great detail. All of this can be found on our website chronologia.org. Or you can visit the museum. It's also a wonderful opportunity to get acquainted with the new chronology without spending weeks or months reading books, just by visiting the museum. So, I invite you to familiarize yourself with how our history is actually structured. I believe that it is important for every educated person to understand this. Because without understanding our past, we cannot fully understand the present.
Gleb Vladimirovich, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hello. Today, Gleb Vladimirovich Nosovsky will talk about an important scientific discovery made in collaboration with Anatoly Timofeyevich Fomenko during the study of written sources and the reconstruction of authentic facts of ancient and medieval history. Gleb Vladimirovich, good evening.
Good evening.
Gleb Vladimirovich, back in the 1990s, you and Anatoly Fomenko put forward and substantiated the hypothesis that the evangelical Jerusalem was not located in modern Israel but on the Bosphorus. Then, you conducted an expedition to Turkey and found undeniable evidence for this hypothesis. Please tell us how it happened.
That's absolutely correct. Back in the 1990s, we came to the conclusion that the evangelical Jerusalem was located on the Bosporus, and initially, we thought it was Constantinople. After some time, we discovered the tomb of Yusha, the place where Christ was crucified, and the evangelical Mount Golgotha or Calvary Hill, which is now called Mount Beykoz. We did this, as far as I remember, in 1995, after reading a book by Jalal Isat about Constantinople, which mentioned a mysterious mountain near Istanbul, Constantinople, on which either the bed of Hercules or the tomb of King Amycos or some other ancient sanctuary was located, or the tomb of Joshua. This mysterious mountain with its ancient enigmatic tomb was located near Constantinople, and we decided to investigate what kind of tomb it was. And so, as far as I remember, in 1995, we went there and had some difficulties finding this tomb because Turks don't understand when you say, Tomb of Jesus. They call it the Tomb of Yusha. It took us a while to explain to them what we were looking for, but eventually, we found this symbolic tomb, which was 17 meters long. When we reached this mountain, the symbolic tomb of Yusha, we discovered that it was a very famous sanctuary among the residents of Istanbul. Believers from Istanbul constantly come there, have weddings, and pray regularly. It's a fenced area. There is an entrance to the enclosure, and inside is the symbolic tomb. People stand around it. The tomb itself is a rectangular plot of land approximately 17 meters long and 3 to 4 meters wide. The grill is covered with a chain link fence so that people cannot reach in and take a piece of the land. At that time, it was like this. People were walking around, praying, and it was evident that this place was highly admired. It is still called the Tomb of Jesus, or in Turkish, the Tomb of Saint Yusha. This is the symbolic tomb of Jesus. Again, and I emphasize this, it is a symbolic tomb. There is no actual burial there. It is a symbolic monument. I am now showing you a high-angle shot where we raised the camera above the grill. This monument perfectly corresponds to the place of Christ's crucifixion. On the edges, 2 points are marked, in the form of 2 millstones. One is a millstone with a hole. A millstone is a figurative name. It is a column with a hole. A pole is attached to it. It is located on one side, and on the other side, there is a similar column but shorter, not protruding much from the ground. It is cracked and also has a hole in the middle, symbolizing another point. There are 2 points. As we assume, one millstone symbolizes the place of crucifixion. Presumably, the hole in the stone symbolizes the cross that was inserted there. And the second millstone symbolizes, as we understand it, the place where Christ was taken down from the cross and mourned. This is the entrance to the sanctuary. It is a large sanctuary. I repeat once again that many people from Istanbul still go there to pray. After carefully studying various testimonies about how the Lord's tomb looked and the place where Christ was crucified according to ancient accounts, we came to the conclusion that this is indeed Golgotha. This highest mountain on the Bosporus is the very same Golgotha where Christ was crucified. The tomb of Jesus represents both the place of crucifixion and the place where he was taken down from the cross. However, having discovered that the evangelical Jerusalem was located in Constantinople, we encountered a contradiction that we couldn't resolve for a long time between what we saw and what is written in the Gospels. Because the distance from Istanbul, that is, Constantinople, to Mount Beykoz, that is, Mount Golgotha, is over 30 kilometers. Moreover, one has to cross the Bosporus, and there were no bridges at that time. That means, one has to sail and walk for over 30 kilometers. According to the Gospels, the events happened relatively quickly. Jesus was given the cross. He carried it for some time, climbed the mountain, and was crucified there. The accounts in the Gospels describe a fairly short journey. Although the ascent was long and described as a difficult, heavy ascent for Jesus carrying the heavy cross, but it was not a long way to the mountain. There was no crossing of any strait, no major river, and no mention of a boat. And yet, 30 kilometers is a whole day's walk from morning till evening. But according to the Gospels, all this took place within a few hours. This contradiction troubled us. Therefore, we wondered how it actually happened, how to make sense of it. In 2006, we once again went to the Beykoz because one of our readers provided us with information that there was an interesting ancient cemetery there. Although this information did not prove to be true, it was actually very fortunate. While searching for that cemetery, we accidentally found Jerusalem. We went to the Beykoz and started searching. It is the mountaintop, and this is the spring near the tomb of Jesus. This spring is where water flows, but it doesn't come out of the ground there. It comes out from under the ground in this location. People are not allowed there. There's a mesh, but a large hole was made in it, and we found a young Turkish woman who guided us. She was a lively girl. She led us to this spring, showed us the areas around the tomb. She told us that a lot of gold is found there. The locals constantly search for gold and find it, including gold coins. It's all overgrown there. There are ruins. Now you can see in the photo the ruins of some structures. There are some pits. Local people dig in them to find old gold coins, and they occasionally find them. You see, there's some ancient masonry covered in leaves and overgrown with bushes. These are the ruins of some buildings, a city or a settlement around the tomb. We wandered there, and then at the flea market nearby the tomb. I think the same girl showed us old paintings related to the Mount of Jesus. One of the paintings caught our attention, and we either took a photo of it or maybe even bought it. It depicts Turks resting near the tomb of Jesus. They sit there, relaxing, with a view of the Bosporus, its mouth leading to the Black Sea, and they gaze at the impressive castle on the mountain. Jalal Isat also wrote about these ancient ruins, saying that from the Mount of Jesus, one can see some ancient Byzantine ruins. However, we didn't see them. The thing is, in this painting, the view is clear, but now everything is covered with trees. And when you're on Mount of Jesus, on Beykoz, you won't see what is depicted in this painting because of the dense vegetation. Therefore, this painting intrigued us a lot, and we started to think, what is this? Maybe it's just a fantastic depiction. We couldn't understand it but took it or photographed it and continued our journey. Before going there, we pre-ordered a taxi. We arrived from Istanbul by taxi, over the bridge, across the Bosporus. We asked the taxi driver to drive us around the area and find this ancient cemetery that our reader had told us about. But we didn't find any cemetery on the Beykoz itself, although we drove around the tomb. We also drove around the foothills but found nothing. Then the taxi driver told us, "Yes, I know, there's a cemetery nearby, and I'll take you there." We were delighted and went with him. He drove us. When he descended from the mountain, we found ourselves on the shores of the Bosporus. We were amazed by the view. We asked him to stop, got out, and took photos. This is the photo from 2006. We saw the same fortress depicted in that painting. It's visible up there. Here's a close-up photo. We saw it from the Bosphorus shore and started thinking how to get to it, but continued our way to the cemetery. However, it turned out to be the same place. This taxi driver brought us to the cemetery. The thing is, behind Yoros, behind those towers, across the ravine, if you pass through the trees and bushes, there is indeed a cemetery. And the taxi driver took us to that cemetery. You can't see the cemetery here, it's behind me. And he showed us that cemetery. But despite being on a very high Bosphorus shore and being very close to the Yoros towers, we couldn't see them from here because the dense row of bushes blocked the view. By the merest accident, I decided to go behind those bushes and see what was there. It was purely accidental. And as soon as I passed through those bushes, I saw this scene. This is again a photo from 2006. I saw those two huge towers and the inscription. It was right in front of them on a post, and it said, Yoros-Jerusalem, which means Fortress Yoros. It astonished me because Yoros is Jerusalem. In Turkish, it is pronounced Yoros. In Russian, of course, we can't say it like that because we always stress the letter yo, while in their language, it is unstressed. That's why I say Yoros. Moreover, the letter yo is absent in Church Slavonic, and it was also absent in the Old Formal Russian language. Not just the letter, but the sound itself. The sound yo is absent in the Church language. Now, we say yo, but in Church Slavonic, we cannot say yo. Everything we currently say using yo was always said with ye in the past, and accordingly, all church names in the Russian language never contain the sound yo. Therefore, even when people say Yoros, it sounds jarring to me. Well, in general, the letter yo is actually unnecessary. It's not without reason that our ancestors did not use it in books because it's simply a variant of the pronunciation of the letter ye. Saying ye instead of yo has always been the norm in Russian. It has always been grammatically correct and had a somewhat solemn sound. But today, everything is changing. Nevertheless, personally, I don't like the letter yo, and we never use it in our books. However, now people think they are smarter than their ancestors and have decided to put these dots everywhere, even though it is a non-Russian letter. So, I saw this inscription, Yoros, and it amazed me. By the way, this post with the inscription was later cut down. After we published these photos in our books, a year or two later, we came to Yoros Fortress and didn't find that post. The name itself, of course, is known. There's a restaurant named after it. It is commonly used in the area, but that post with the inscription right in front of those towers is not there. I'm standing, taking a photo, and there's a ravine between me and those towers. It's a remnant of the ancient moat around Yoros. Well, of course, we were struck by the resemblance between this fortress, its location, moreover its name Yoros, and the neighboring mountain where the tomb of Jesus is located. There are many old icons, old depictions, where Christ is leaving Jerusalem, and these two huge towers, and the gate between them are depicted similarly. He is coming out of them, and nearby is the mountain where the cross is being prepared. And behind them in the background, there is a strait or a river. It's like a painting. Beykoz mountain is to our left, where the Golgotha is. Here, we are on the mountain where Yoros is located, at the top point. Yoros itself is situated on the slope of the mountain. We are near the gate towers, and the fortress itself is located downhill, descending towards the Bosporus. These are two neighboring mountains. On one mountain is Yoros, on the neighboring mountain Golgotha is the tomb of Jesus. That's exactly how it's described in the Gospels. Sure, the journey was not short, but it's not 30 kilometers. One has to descend from one mountain and climb up another. It took several hours, just as it's described in the Gospels. There was no need to cross any straits. It's all on the same shore. The picture perfectly matched how it was supposed to happen according to the Gospels, and that's how it actually happened. Let's look at more photos. This is a view of the towers from a slightly different angle. There's the Bosporus in the distance. Another view of these towers. Again, the Bosporus is visible, and on the right, it flows into the Black Sea. It's an impressive structure. And the cemetery related to Yoros, to which the taxi driver brought us, is behind me, behind the bushes. We ended up here purely by chance. We approached these towers. The gates between them are currently closed, and they were closed back then too. But there was a passage on the right side where you could enter, and then it was blocked. Nowadays, archaeologists don't allow access there. They are digging something and don't let people in. But back in 2006 and for a few years after that, you could easily enter Yoros Fortress. This is inside the fortress. We entered inside. We are looking at the same towers, but from the inside. They are not as rounded here. They are rounded on the outside. But on this side, there were some structures attached to them, remnants of buildings. In reality, everything under this green grass is all ruins. The city was destroyed, blown up, shattered, and only these towers remained. It was a destroyed city, from which only the most powerful, massive parts of the fortress structures remained. There were many walls there. This is the citadel, the upper town, the upper fortress. A huge area was enclosed, descending towards the Bosporus, and the remnants of these walls still exist. I'll show you the map shortly. This is the view from inside Yoros towards the Bosporus. The Black Sea is on the right, and the Bosporus flows towards Istanbul. We are looking towards Istanbul. Istanbul is in the distance. See the remains of another tower? These are not the gate towers. These are different ones. Here's one tower, the second tower. The slope towards the Bosporus, there's a small gate. The city descends along the slope. This is another photo from inside. We are inside this ancient city. See the uneven ground? It's evident that they are just stone fragments. Everything was shattered. There were some buildings there. Everything was destroyed, demolished. These are piles of stone debris. They were covered with soil. And now there's an uneven surface with pits where small trees grow. This is a view from the remains of the wall. Not all the walls were completely demolished. This wall overlooks the Bosporus. We see the entrance to the Black Sea. The Black Sea is nearby. It's the northern end of the Bosporus. Some distance still needs to be traveled along the Bosporus, but the Black Sea is already close. It's visible. This is a view from a ship. This is Yoros. See? That mountain where Yoros is located. At the foot of the mountain, there's a small town, and there's a pier where a ship docks, which sails from Istanbul. In the summer, it sails once a day. And on this occasion, we arrived on that ship. So, the first time we came by taxi when we first saw it. And this is another trip a few years later. And here we arrived on the ship. This is a view of the mountain where Yoros is located. On the left, there's an exit to the Black Sea. The Bosporus flows into the Black Sea. To the right, Mount Beykoz or Golgotha is not visible. It is zoomed in. Yoros is at the top. This is not the entire Yoros. The boundaries of Yoros reached the Bosporus. There, a wall ran along the Bosporus, the boundary of the city itself. But the city had a Kremlin, a citadel, an upper town. It was situated at a height. It had its own separate fortress structures. It was separated from the rest of the city. The royal stronghold was the Kremlin, and the city itself was big. Another time, we arrived by ship. We disembark at the pier, and here we immediately see a large painting depicting Yoros. Let me enlarge it for you. You see, here is the upper town with these two towers. And the city itself, where the rest of the people lived, was also large. Look, here are the walls from the upper town. They extend here, extend here. They even ascend to the neighboring Mount Beykoz, to Golgotha. In other words, the slope of Golgotha was also inhabited by the residents of Yoros. It was a huge city located on the shores of the Bosporus and directly adjacent to Mount Golgotha, which is now called Beykoz. We ascend again from the Bosporus side. Here are some towers. This is not the tower we saw from above. These towers are part of the walls that descend towards the Bosporus. Some of them have survived, overgrown. There are some remnants of the walls. There used to be a military base. They are no longer there. When these photos were taken, they were still there. It was a military settlement. It was not possible to go anywhere. We are ascending. This is a military barrack, as far as I remember. And these are the remains of the towers of the old Yoros. These are the walls. You see, they are made of stones, flat ancient bricks. This is a passage leading to the citadel, the Kremlin. There's a restaurant nearby. I think we passed through the restaurant to get there. Again, we entered inside. There were no archaeological excavations at that time, like today. Today, everything is closed. All the entrances are closed, and it's not possible to enter. How? There's a grill, and someone climbs over it. You can do it in running shoes if no one sees you. But back then, you could easily enter, whereas now only illegally. Currently, there are archaeological excavations inside. Interesting excavations. I looked through the gate several times. It was no longer possible to enter, but you could see that no one was doing anything there. I never saw a single archaeologist or any person there. However, now everything is closed. This is another view from the towers. There's a ditch here. Now it's a ravine, but it's the remains of the moat. The ravine passes by the towers, by the walls. These are remnants of the walls. Very impressive structures. In those times, it was truly something grandiose. Now it's overgrown, abandoned. This is also a view from the wall, one of Yoros' walls. The Bosporus is in the distance. This is a round tower. Another view from the walls of Yoros. The Bosporus is in the distance. These are remnants of the fortifications. You can appreciate how impressive they were. This is the entrance that leads from the citadel to the actual city. There used to be gates here, but now it's just an opening. By the way, this was done later, when archaeologists started working and fenced it off. This was taken later. You see, a sign is hung, indicating that entry is prohibited. In those photos, the same passage was shot, but it was open. And now it's fenced off. Someone with a gun. But there's no one inside. Some people are sneaking through. We saw them. Maybe not through this passage, but through another one where the mesh isn't as secure. They raised it a bit and got inside. This is again the Bosporus. We boarded the ship again. Here I captured both of these mountains. On the left is the mountain where the fortress Yoros is located, which is in the distance. And on the right is the mountain where the tomb of Yusha is located. So, these are two neighboring mountains. One mountain and another. The city itself descended from the citadel and partially ascended the mountain Golgotha. That's why Christ had to descend from this mountain and ascend to that one. Sure, it was not a short trip, but it wasn't a whole day's journey either.
In the Multimedia Museum of the New Chronology, in the hall that tells the story of the rise of the Second Empire, there are multimedia maps of the empire, a module that describes the ruling Komnenos dynasty. Augmented reality is used, allowing visitors to see what the fortress of Yoros looked like during the reign of Andronikos Christ and how the rulers of the empire controlled the movement of ships on the Bosporus. We will continue the conversation with Gleb Vladimirovich Nosovsky about the evangelical Jerusalem Yoros in a week. See you on the channel of the Multimedia Museum of the New Chronology. Hello! Today we continue the conversation with Gleb Vladimirovich Nosovsky about Evangelical Jerusalem, the ancient fortress of Yoros. Gleb Vladimirovich, good evening.
Good evening.
Gleb Vladimirovich, in your books, you provide images of ancient geographical maps on which the fortress of Yoros is marked. Please tell us more about this.
Let me show you some old maps right now. This is the Bosporus as it appears. How did it all happen, according to our reconstruction? Here is the Bosporus, and on the left is the Black Sea. This is the northern end of the Bosporus, and here is the southern end. This is the Sea of Marmara, and this is the Golden Horn. Istanbul is located here. The Golden Horn is a fracture in the rocky terrain. The shores of the Golden Horn are completely steep. Therefore, a ship with a deep draft can enter the Golden Horn and approach the shore. In other words, it is very deep here. In this sense, the Golden Horn is an ideal place, an ideal harbor for large ships that cannot approach the shore near Yoros. The shore here is not precipitous. Here, it gradually slopes into the water, but here precipitously. But on the other hand, where Constantinople, the present-day Istanbul, is located, there are no water sources. They exist, but they are very scarce. For such a large city that was built here, there was not enough local water. Therefore, when Constantinople was built, they constructed an aqueduct from Belgrade Forest. It starts approximately from here, and the length of this aqueduct is about 20 kilometers. Only then could a city with a large population that required a lot of fresh water exist there. Therefore, in ancient times, this location for a city was inconvenient. Moreover, the strait is very wide, and without guns, it cannot be swept with fire. Although there is a tiny island in the middle, it is still useless. In ancient times, when people were shooting arrows, it could not be shot through. Here, Istanbul is built today, and it is its Asian part. In ancient times, such a city could not have obstructed the path of ships in this place. For an ancient city, this place was inconvenient. It was inconvenient due to the lack of water and the excessively wide strait. And this is the most convenient place for the location of the ancient capital. When, according to our reconstruction, the capital was relocated from Egypt to the Bosporus, it was originally placed here, where Yoros is located today. This is the ancient Troy, the ancient Evangelical Jerusalem, the ancient Tsargrad. At that time, there were no deep draft sea and ocean vessels. There were small boats, flat-bottomed river boats were easily pulled ashore here. The Bosporus is quite narrow at this location, and even a rock protrudes from the water's surface in the middle. So, at this point, the Bosporus could have been blocked with a chain. The city was built on both shores. Here it is depicted on both shores. The main city with the Kremlin is here, and a part was here. In the middle, a rock protrudes from the water's surface. Today, there is a buoy to prevent ships from colliding with it, but in the past, A chain was hung from here to the middle and from the middle to the other shore. It was at this point that the Bosporus was blocked, not here, where it is slightly narrower. However, due to the rock protruding here, it was possible to divide it into two sections. It is a bit closer to this shore. Mountain Beykoz is nearby, where the tomb of Jesus is located. This is Golgotha or Calvary. So, Jerusalem, Golgotha, and on the other shore, another part of Jerusalem, while the Bosporus was blocked here. This is how they controlled the passage of ships, which were still small boats at that time. Large boats were the ships of that time. They traveled between the Black Sea, the Sea of Marmara, and the Mediterranean Sea. There were enough water sources here to sustain a certain population, not as large as in later Istanbul, but still. This is where the original capital was located after the relocation from Egypt to the Bosporus. Jerusalem, the city of David, the one associated with the ancient Roman Empire. Another map. Here, it is also clearly visible that the old capital, Yoros, was placed in this narrow spot, and Golgotha is nearby. Here is Yoros, and here is Golgotha depicted as a mountain. Another map. Again, we see this location. It is the narrowest point, and Yoros is precisely located there. Here it is depicted. By the way, it is depicted on both shores. You see? On the Asian bank as well. In other words, initially, the main city was located on the Asian side, and in Constantinople, the main city is on the European side. However, like present-day Istanbul, it was situated on both sides. Istanbul has both European and Asian parts. It's just that the main part is in Europe. The palace and all the main monuments are located there. In the ancient city of Yoros, the ancient Jerusalem, its main part was located on the Asian side, and there was also a part on the European side. So dictates the area, because in Istanbul, the European part is most convenient for the royal palace, and here, the Asian part is most convenient for the royal palace and the city. It is located on a high bank, and it was easier to build fortifications there. Here it is beautifully marked. Do you see? The narrow spot. It is clearly emphasized as a narrow spot. This is Yoros. This is the European part of Yoros. And this is the nearby tomb of Jesus. This is how it looked, and on the right is the Black Sea. So, it is very close to the mouth of the Bosporus, where it meets the Black Sea. Another map. Here it is clearly visible that this is the narrow spot, and a rock arises that allows for a shorter distance and hanging a chain. Do you see what is written here? The Mountain of Giants. This is the tomb of Jesus on the Mountain of Giants. And next to it is this fortress. This is Jerusalem Yoros. And this is Golgotha, or the Mountain of Giants. There was also a settlement opposite Yoros. This is how they stretched the chain, considering that there is a rock here where the chain was attached. As a result, the chain consisted of two parts. I think it is already clear that this place was indeed the most convenient for the founding of the original capital. The original capital of these lands had to be placed here. This was the most suitable place to block the Bosporus and control all the boats and ships that sailed through it. This was the most suitable place to build these impregnable fortifications. Moreover, there was water here. There was no need to build an aqueduct. This is where this location was. But when Emperor Constantine, also known as Dmitry Donskoy, moved the capital here from Rome, also known as Yaroslavl or Old Rome, he did not relocate it to this place, which had already become inconvenient at that time, because large ships and guns had appeared. Large ships appeared, and this place became inconvenient. And the space here is not that vast. They built the city near the Golden Horn, where huge ships could enter and dock. The drawbacks of this place, primarily the lack of water, were addressed by constructing an aqueduct. This was done at the next level, at a higher stage of development. And since guns had already been invented, they could easily control this passage, despite its width. Here's another old map. There are many of them, but I believe it's necessary to show them all so that you can visualize how it looked. This paired point catches the eye, where two capes are located. This is Yoros. Here it is very clearly visible. A beautiful map. Here's Istanbul, Constantinople. Behind it is the Golden Horn, next to the steep walls. This is the new capital, New Rome, which Constantine built not far from ancient Troy. He wanted to build the city precisely on the site of ancient Troy, but he was advised against because that place was not very convenient, and he built the city here. Historians say that ancient Troy was located at the Dardanelles, so one needs to go there, through the Sea of Marmara, closer to the Mediterranean Sea. There, Schliemann found some ruins, similar to many other ruins found there, as they are abundant. He declared it to be Troy. This confusion arose precisely because historians were puzzled. They knew that Constantine, also known as Dmitry Donskoy according to the New Chronology, built New Rome not far from Troy. But where is this Troy? So, they imagined that it was not on the Bosporus but at the Dardanelles. The Bosporus connects the Sea of Marmara with the Black Sea. The Sea of Marmara is at the bottom, and it connects to the Mediterranean Sea through the Dardanelles. Historians sent Troy there on paper, and there they allegedly found it with the help of Schliemann and his forged golden treasure that he found there. Gold, of course, sharply increased in value. So, it was just gold, but then it turned into the gold of Troy. Thus, Schliemann's project had a commercial aspect as well. Here, it is very clear that the most convenient place for the ancient capital is the narrowest part of the Bosporus. And these are two capes, two mountains. The tomb of Yusha is marked. Let's zoom in and take a closer look at the tomb of Jesus. This is the mountain of Hercules. It's probably not very clear. This is Golgotha. And this city is the fortress of Yoros. Another map. Yoros is depicted very clearly, and here is Mountain Golgotha. Do you see? They are very close. Just as depicted in icons and old paintings. Finally, the last map. It is quite modern, but nevertheless, You see? Yoros. Even the walls are drawn here. It's a good map. The fortifications are depicted, and the upper city is shown with 2 towers. This is, in fact, the Kremlin. It is enclosed by its walls. From there, the walls descend towards the Bosporus. Here, along the Bosporus, everything was also settled. Old small ships and boats could dock here. There were no docks for large sea or ocean ships, but the small ships of that time could dock. Back then, there were no ships venturing into high sea. Navigation was coastal, along the shore. Only in specific cases, when wind and currents were favorable, could they cross the sea along predetermined routes. These were rare occurrences, and generally, navigation was coastal. And you see? There were numerous fortifications here. On the other side were the outskirts of this city. Part of this city was on the European side. Where I'm pointing with the mouse, the chain was stretched, and there is a stone that emerges on the surface of the Bosporus. Today, a buoy is attached to prevent ships from hitting. We made such a discovery that made many things fall into place, and many things became clear from what previously raised questions for us. I must say that the picture has unexpectedly straightened out. Unexpectedly, because we did not anticipate it. We thought that if there was an ancient city somewhere in the vicinity of Constantinople, nothing of it would remain. But we certainly did not expect such impressive remnants, with such a significant name. It is astonishing that historians did not see any of this. It is surprising that they let all of this pass by and constructed their own fantastic narratives. They searched for Troy somewhere, at the Dardanelles. They crafted some silly Trojan horse out of boards. They depicted our history as an obvious fairy tale. It is still presented as an obvious fairy tale in our textbooks. For some reason, they do not want to see the truth. And the truth, in general, is not deeply concealed. It is not so difficult to reveal all of this. We have unearthed it. How many of us are there? 2 or 3 people, and we have unearthed all of this in 2 or 3 decades. But there are thousands of historians. They could have discovered all of this long ago, but they do not want to. They still cannot make sense of chronology because they lack the education to understand something natural scientific, and chronology is a natural scientific discipline. It requires knowledge of scientific methods. At least, they could have learned, no big deal, but they don't want to. That's why we had to take on all of this ourselves, and we did what we could. Of course, there is still a lot left. For historians, there is a good deal of work still outstanding. There are many uncertainties, much digging to be done, and a lot that still needs exploration. Therefore, I appeal to young historians with advice that before you lies a field of fascinating activity. You have the potential to accomplish so much in this field. It is just beginning.
In the Multimedia Museum of the New Chronology, in the hall that tells the story of the rise of the Second Empire, there are multimedia maps of the empire, a module that describes the ruling Komnenos dynasty. Augmented reality is used. allowing visitors to see what the fortress of Yoros looked like during the reign of Andronikos Christ and how the rulers of the empire controlled the movement of ships on the Bosphorus. Gleb Vladimirovich, thank you very much for this presentation and for the interesting conversation.
You're welcome.